Perfect. All right, I'm back, guys. I'm back. Excellent. Whew. Okay, so it's time for a study group time. So for those of you tuning in, this is study group, which means we read books and discuss the material and discuss spiritual topics. No personal readings, no personal questions. This is all topical. This is all spiritual-based content and study group material. So if you're tuning in and you're wanting a free reading, my apologies, but that was for the last hour. This hour, we're just doing study group time. So you'll have to come back next week or Friday for the lives, right? So, all right. For those of you tuning in, hey guys, hello. Hey, Miss Martinez. So something I want to tell you guys. So, I don't know if y'all caught all the craziness with the snake stuff in the last live because of like what happened right before I went in the live. But I was telling my partner because I just remembered something. A couple of weeks ago, I had a dream. I didn't understand the meaning of the dream, and I thought maybe it had to do with like a person. Because sometimes when people have dreams about snakes, it could represent, because most people have a negative association with snakes. Some people don't, but a lot of people do just because of their own fear. So sometimes when people are having dreams about snakes, it may actually represent people who either are just very sneaky, or they're being very underhanded, they're being duplicitous, or they're simply, you feel like they're a threat, or they are a threat and you need to be careful with them. So sometimes when you have a dream about a snake, it's representative of a person. However, I don't really have the same ideas about snakes. I think living here and having seen as many as I have, I don't have that fear the way that I used to, but I do respect them and I appreciate them because they help us with like the extra, when we have too many mice around, etc. But I still respect them. I'm not trying to go up and like touch a snake or whatever. That's just not the way. That's not my level of comfort yet. Maybe one day I'll get there, but I ain't there yet. Anyway, so 2 weeks ago, I had a dream, and in this dream, I was working out in the yard in the front of the house, and the garage was up, and a snake came through. I don't remember the snake it was in a dream. It might have been like it may have been I don't know if it was a red racer or a bull snake, but the snake came into the garage, and I freaked out because it was like, oh my God, how am I going to get it out of the garage? So in my dream, the snake came into the garage and then came into the house because the door was open for the garage, and we have 3 cats, right? So in my dream, I was freaking out because I thought the snake was going to like bite one of the girls if one of the girls starts messing with it. So in my dream, I'm like running after the snake, and it's going through the house, and I'm running after the snake, and then the snake freaks out. It's scared, so it's not trying to stay in the house, and it doesn't do anything. It passes right by the girls, by the cats. And then in my dream, the snake jumps up and jumps through our screen door, because we have an outside screen door where it has a netting, right? It has that whole like the little tight woven netting, but it jumped right through it as if it didn't exist. And I was like, okay, it's outside now, so I don't have to worry about it. So in the dream, I was like, okay, it's outside. But I thought it was weird. I'm like, how did the snake get through the net? How did it get through the screening material? That didn't make any sense. Like, it shouldn't have never been able to get through. Well, lo and behold, today, 2 weeks later, we had a snake come, and we had just put some netting in the garden, over the garden area, and the snake got through the netting and got stuck in it. And so that was the whole thing that happened today. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe my dream was about the snake getting stuck in the netting and getting through it to begin with. So I'm thinking that's what my dream was about. So now I'm like, I was already told 2 weeks ago this was coming. So yeah, but it's interesting whenever you have dreams and like you don't realize the significance, and you think it's one thing, but then it ends up happening. You're like, oh my God, this is literally a dream about a snake. This wasn't like a symbolic. This was like a literal dream about a snake that was going to be coming through our property and getting through the netting or the screening material, which is exactly what happened. So interesting enough. Anyways, all right. So Darrell's like, you would be a great narrator for a movie or book. Tell my cousin Ace I love him and miss him. Aw, thank you. Yeah, they can hear you. I always tell people, like, they can hear us. Like, they can definitely hear us. Well, I will be narrating my own book when I'm done with it. I'm working on a book right now, and I'm supposed to get it out this summer. So there's a book in the works, and I'm going to do the Audible version of the book as well. So I'm going to have my own voice and everything. Then there's also going to be like an online class that goes along with the book as well, because the book is about psychic ability and developing your psychic abilities. So, all right, guys. Again, this is a study group time, so no personal questions. All questions must pertain to the topic, which is we are reading Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And I'm on book 1. And then what I do is I read sections of the book, and then I stop, we discuss it, and I share my own perceptions, I give my own commentary about it, and then, then I check and see what you guys are asking me about the material as well, or if you guys have any spiritual or topical questions that you would like to ask. I'm open to that. But any personal questions, that would have been in the last hour, y'all, so I can't do any personal questions in this hour, okay? All right, so where we left off. So we're on section 181 of the book. This is Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And basically Neil is having a conversation with God, and he's basically trying to get as much guidance and support and understanding from God. And so they're going back and forth in this dialogue. So as I read Neil's part, I'm going to say Neil, and then I'll read his part. When it's God's part, I'll say God, and then I'll read that part. Then I'll stop every little while to kind of comment and so forth. And you can write your topical questions in the comment section below. Okay, so where are we at? Okay, so this is Neil. Will utopia ever come to the planet Earth? Will God ever show himself to Earth's people as promised already has? Is there such a thing as the second coming? Will there ever be an end of the world or an apocalypse as prophesied in the Bible? Is there a one true religion? If so, which one? So I'll stop there because I want to comment on this. So when it comes to like the idea of a second coming, or when it comes to the idea of like this whole apocalyptic type event, first of all, I think we all need to understand that when some of those prophecies were made, when some of those things were spoken of, they were specifically talking about things happening in the world at that time, because there was a lot of craziness in the world at that time. And it depends on who you're talking about, because you can acknowledge Christ in this, where Jesus made some mention of certain things. You can talk about some of the other prophets, but it just depends on who specifically you're talking about, because they all kind of built their ideas on stuff, so they were aware of each other. So some of them built on what had already existed. Jesus had already built his ideas and some of his beliefs on the Jewish faith, because he was a Jewish man in first century CE. So in Judea, so he was a Jewish man. So he was following a lot of customs and traditions on top of what he was also teaching and what he was also trying to help others understand. So when you talk about the idea of like a second coming, etc., everything that he spoke about, everything that he made reference to, he was talking about it specifically at that time in history, because at that time in history, the Roman Empire had basically, they pulled the U.S. with like Afghanistan, which is, we kind of invaded Iraq, and we invaded these areas in the east, Afghanistan, etc. We invaded these areas, we occupied it, and then we kind of tried to restructure it and change it in a way that benefited us, right? So the Roman Empire did the exact same thing during that period. They would invade territories, and one of the ways that they would basically manage it was, first of all, they wouldn't try to, maybe in the earlier periods they did, but in the latter periods of the empire, they, instead of trying to force people to change to everything Roman, they simply just annexed and like assumed that area, and then they would put in a kind of a proxy, or someone who would act as like the Roman representative, but they would use that culture's leaders. So they would grab a leader or take a leader from that culture who was more than willing to step into that position of power if they were going to benefit from like the vast riches that the Roman Empire was going to offer. So they would basically step into that role, and then they would act the ruler of that area or that region. And so there were several of those people who were in those states. And so the temple and the priestly sect of the Jewish faith at that time, because there was only one major, there was the temple. This is where God existed for the Jewish people, the Temple Mount. And so it was run by a priestly group of individuals who had to somewhat become corrupted by the ruling class, which at that point was the Roman Empire, and some of these leaders who were still Jewish, but they also were kind of collaborators with the Roman Empire. So anybody that had any issues with the Roman Empire, they were going to get squashed. They were going to be put down. And so at that time, they were basically trying to get their power back. The Jewish people, they were trying to get rid of the Romans. Like, this is our land, this is ours. Get out of here. You're occupying us. You're telling us how to live. You're bringing all of your gods with you, all of the paganism, and so that's where some of that was an issue, and there was a lot of corruption happening within their systems. So they were trying to do at that time what we now feel the same way about some of our government systems or some of our religious organizations. We feel, some of us who are Catholic or who grew up in the Catholic religion or faith, we know that the Catholic faith is anything but is anything but pure, and there's a lot of corruption there. Same thing with government. There's a lot of corruption there. So it's almost like trying to wipe away or trying to clean up the mess. And so some of us think, okay, the best way to deal with that is just to get rid of the government, or to get rid of all the politicians, or to get rid of the religious organization, and that's one way of thinking about things. And so there were a lot of people at the time of Christ in first century AD, first century CE, ancient Judea, where their idea was, and there was a lot of zealots and a lot of Zacharis, and they wanted to get rid of these invading forces or these occupying forces, and they just wanted to focus on their own people and on their own culture, but that's not what happened. So you had a lot of that craziness happening there. So when they were discussing or talking about the end is near, or that there was going to be that everything would because even Christ said it, that everything would come to pass within his lifetime, and that there would be an end, like 70 years after Christ existed, the Roman army, because they did get their freedom, they were able to push the Romans out of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem. Yeah, Jerusalem. They were able to push a lot of the. They were able to push them out and to kind of take over their territories, which then started this infighting within the different factions. And then a few years later, the Romans came back because they were in a weakened state. Their empire was already starting to have issues, but they came back in a much more dominating force, and they wiped out all of the Jewish people in the city. They killed everybody. They killed all of the people who were working with them. They killed all of the poor people. They killed everybody. This is like I think it's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. It could go up into the millions because it was a very heavily populated area, but they pretty much wiped everybody out, and they kind of flattened the city. So what we see now, when you look at like the Temple Mount, when you look at, where, and because at this point the Temple Mount it's kind of a collection of, you've got three different religions going on there. You've got the Jewish people, you've got the Muslim people, then you also have the Muslim faith, and then you also have the Christian faith. So you have all these different things happening simultaneously, and they're all trying to kind of work together. But that's what that area, that's what that's all about, is because it's representative of where the temple was, the temple that God existed in, the Holy of Holies. So they pushed them out. Romans came back, wiped them all out, and so the end was near. They all were wiped out. So a lot of Jewish culture was lost during that period, and the only Jewish literature, the only works and history that they were able to hold on to were the diaspora Jews, which were the Jewish people who ended up, they were already settled outside of Jerusalem, because it was a thing for them to travel once a year to participate in Passover. So the diaspora Jews were the only ones that were left, and they were everywhere except in Jerusalem, because that whole area had been completely decimated and everybody was killed. So what was left behind, what was left of the culture and all of these ancient texts and writings of the Jewish people were from the diaspora Jews. So there was not as much left over and left behind by all of those atrocities. So a lot was lost in all of that. But they were referencing the end is near and all that. This is what they were talking about. And this is actually what happened. And so that was the case situation here. But people always assume second coming or whatever. Now, there is more to it than that, because when you think of a second coming or the return, it is actually representative of an energy, of a state of mind, of a state of being. If you think of Christ as like a hybrid version of the human being, of the divinity within form, if you think of Jesus as like a version of a divine being in form, which we all are, a lot of us just don't remember or don't realize it, don't claim it, but we are the same. And so when he showed up, he was a good example of how we can access that within ourselves, because he repeatedly said that, all that I can do, so can you. You can do what I can do. He was repeatedly stating that. So it's not like he was telling everybody, you can't do anything, you can't do anything. I'm the only person that can do anything. Like, that's not what he said. That was not the message of his ministry. But he was trying to teach us about ourselves and about our connection to God and our divine beingness and how we were connected to everything and to each other. And I think he was trying to focus on like the ways that we can amplify that, the ways that we could grow and evolve and develop and just be better, because we weren't. And so if you consider it to be a version of what we could be, think of it that way. And so now with the idea of like a second coming, there is, it depends on how you want to look at it. If you think of reincarnation, there's definitely Christ energies in the world today that exist. And you may not know them immediately, because true Christ energies, Christ itself, the word Christ just represents, it doesn't represent like Jesus Christ. People think his name was Jesus Christ. No, his name was Yeshua. First of all, his name was Yeshua, not Jesus. Jesus is like an English version of the name, but Yeshua is his name. But they didn't have last names. They usually were associated with the Yeshua of Miriam, which was his mother, Mary. And so, which interestingly in the Bible, when they refer to him in that, that's actually kind of an insult, because back then, if you were associated with your mother, then that was immediately telling that you were born out of wedlock. So they would have, so that if they said, Jesus of Joseph, then that was representative of him being from Joseph. But if you read the earlier texts and the earlier versions of the Gospels, they actually refer to Jesus as Jesus of Mary, which is usually an indicator that he was born out of wedlock. And he was the oldest of his family, because he had sisters and brothers. People don't know that he had sisters and brothers. James is the one that took over the church when he was crucified. There's also Simon as well. Is this James and Simon? Yeah. But it was James the Just, is what he was referred to as James. And he carried on the religion. He actually supported the ministry for a lot longer than Jesus was able to himself, just because his went on for 40 years, until Paul came along, and Paul was like, hey everybody, I know Jesus and I have the real word, and his family don't really know Jesus how I know Jesus, and his family don't know what they're talking about. His brother doesn't know what he's talking about. They're all focused on like Jewish traditions. I'm focused more on like the Greek, trying to incorporate this more with Greek ideas and philosophies. And so Paul came along and claimed that he knew Jesus and that he had a vision of Jesus, even though he never actually met him and had no interaction with him during the course of his lifetime. His family did. James did. So some interesting like gossip and stories there, which I'll probably get into at some point. Anyways, going back to this. So, because I'm totally off on a tangent, but the second coming is an energy. It's a representative energy. And there are people now who exist, and there are Christ energies that continue to show up, because they're supposed to remind us of who we are and what we possess, what we are really about. And so there are several in the world. When I asked Aja about this, I said, how many versions of the Christ energy are there? And Aja said there were 13. There are always 13. That there are always 13 masters present in a cycle. And if a master passes, there will be a master to replace that, because there's always the 13. And they don't go around making grand claims about themselves. They don't go around trying to use those claims as a way to manipulate or to control or to have power and dominance. They are masters without title. Is like how I can put it. They're masters without title. They don't have to announce themselves. They're not needing to be announced. People will recognize and know them as masters as soon as they show up and as soon as they speak, because it's hard to dispute the Christ energy in someone. And like I said, Aja said there was always 13. So there's 13 on the planet now. Don't know who they are, but there's 13 masters, right? Going back to this. So let me go to the question again, because I want to make sure y'all are up to speed on the question. Will Utopia ever come to the planet Earth? Will God ever show himself to Earth's people as promised? Is there such a thing as the second coming? Will there ever be an end of the world or an apocalypse as prophesied in the Bible? Is there a one true religion? If so, which one? God. That's a book in itself, and will compromise and will comprise much of Volume 3. I've kept this opening volume limited to more personal matters, more practical issues. I'll move to larger questions and matters of global and universal implication in succeeding installments. So God basically said, you ain't ready yet, so I'll tell you when you're ready. And you're going to be ready by book number 3. Neil, is that it? Is that all for now? Are we to speak no more here? God, you miss me already? Neil, I do. This has been fun. Are we quitting now? God, you need a little rest, and your readers need a rest too. There's a lot here to absorb, a lot to wrestle with, a lot to ponder. Take some time off, reflect on this, ponder it. Do not feel abandoned. I am always with you. If you have questions, day-to-day questions, as I know you do even now and will continue to, know that you can call on me to answer them. You do not need the form of this book. This is not the only way I speak with you. Listen to me in the truth of your soul. Listen to me in the feelings of your heart. Listen to me in the quiet of your mind. Hear me everywhere, whenever you have a question. Simply know that I have answered it already. Then open your eyes to your world. My response could be in an article already published, in the sermon already written about to be delivered, in the movie now being made, in the song just yesterday composed, in the words about to be said by a loved one, in the heart of a new friend about to be made. My truth is in the whisper of the wind, the babble of the brook, the crack of the thunder, the tap of the rain. It is the feel of the earth, the fragrance of the lily, the warmth of the sun, the pull of the moon. My truth and your surest help in time of need is as awesome as the night sky, and as simply, incontrovertibly trustful as a baby's gurgle. It is as loud as a pounding heartbeat, and as quiet as a breath, taken in unity with me. I will not leave you. I cannot leave you. You are my creation and my product, my daughter and my son, my purpose and myself. Call on me, therefore, wherever and whenever you are separate from the peace that I am. I will be there with truth and light and love. So, and that's the completion of book 1, which I said I was going to stop there because I wanted to take a break from this book because it's a big book and it's going to take forever. And we're going to start a new book. And then after that one, we'll come back to book number 2. All right, so let me see what you guys are asking me about or talking about this. Remember, no personal questions. This is our study group time, so only topical questions, spiritual matters, or conversations regarding, discussions regarding the book material, conversations with God. So let me look around here because I want to see what you guys are talking about. Let's see. Yeah, Michelle's like, I did not know he had brothers. He did. I think he had 4, if I remember correctly. And then, so far, I think we only know 2 sisters. They were born after him, though, because here's the rumor and the gossip. Back then, there was a lot of rumors going on about Jesus, just because he was really like creating a lot of the community that he grew up around. They didn't really accept them in the same way that his followers and other people from other lands did, just because they didn't know him as like this unique person. They only knew him as just like who they thought he was, and so, you know, there's gossip in the community, but they believed that he was. This was back. I think Mary lived in Sepphoris, and Sepphoris was, I think it was Sepphoris, yeah, and her family, Mary, before she was married, she lived in Sepphoris with her family, and there is gossip, or there were rumors around at that time, that a Roman soldier got her pregnant either while she was married to Joseph or before they were officially wed. The idea is that she got pregnant and then they had to marry her off to make sure that she wasn't seen as like a harlot, or anything like that. So, and the father, what is his name? I forgot his name. What is his name? it's not Pandora. It's Panthras. So Jesus' father supposedly was named Panthras. So Mary and Panthras had a fling. He was a Jewish man working as a Roman soldier. And he, back then, again, like I said, whenever the Romans took over an area, they recruited, because that was their way of trying to maintain power and using, the people of the land to reinforce their own positions of dominance. So after Panthras got her pregnant, apparently they married her with Joseph. Joseph either had already been previously married with children, which would be the siblings, or because apparently he didn't really want to marry. He was completely just, did not want to have to deal with all that. But I think it was more out of a favor in the family. And so they married her off to Joseph, which is why the idea of the whole virgin birth came about, just because they were trying to hide the fact that she got pregnant by, this Roman soldier out of wedlock. So they married her off with Joseph. She left Sepphoris, where she lived with her family. I think her mother's name was Elizabeth, and her father's, I think it was Elizabeth. Her father, I forgot her father's name. Anyways, they went to a area where the family's line tended to congregate. It was kind of because their family was supposedly connected to royal lines, so they kind of congregated in this particular area. Even though they themselves may not have had a whole lot of money, but they were connected to people who did, or connected to families that were well off. And also Joseph apparently was, people think of him as a carpenter. He was not a carpenter. Actually, the word that they use for carpenter does not actually mean carpenter. If you go back and look at the meaning of the word back when it was used, it represents stone worker. So it's the idea of a person that either deals with stone. It's basically, you go to Home Depot and you see all of the people who are waiting for jobs. That's what Joseph was. He was a worker. He was like a day laborer. But apparently he built himself a nice little business or practice, because he became an architect and he started doing work for a lot of people who had money, who were established, the royal houses. I think he made a throne once for one of the leaders or the rulers in that area. But he built a little business for himself, and he began to get much more prominent. And so that's where most of their money came from. But they moved out into the countryside because they wanted to kind of hide the fact that she had gotten pregnant, and they kind of respun it in a different way. People talk, though, and so people in the village were still talking about this even for some time, because this carried on quite a while after Jesus was crucified, and people were still like gossiping about the whole situation regarding him. So when they ended up in the area where the family, I think is Galilee, yeah. So when they ended up there, Nazareth, that's where the family lived. They kind of just, established themselves there, but people were still gossiping. And so when you read the Gospels, you pay attention, y'all, because you have to notice the little details. They give a lot away, and it's all validated in the Gospels. It's not like I'm making this whole thing up. It's all there. You just have to pay attention to what the hell you're reading. Don't just take everything as if it's the way it's been spun. Really look into it. And the Gospel of Mark will be the most significant one, because the Gospel of Mark was the first one, even though there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But the Gospel of Mark is actually the older one, based on the historical archaeology and the detective work there. And then Matthew came after Mark, and then the other two as well. So the Gospel of Mark, if you go back to some of the earliest versions of it, and then the proper translations, because a lot of people took it upon themselves to translate it, and they changed some of the meanings of it, and then those versions, which were in Greek, those versions were taken up by Matthew, Luke, and John, and those were written like 10, 20, 30 years later after Mark. So those were written quite a bit after. But you go to Mark is more stripped down, and in that version, Jesus is a lot more, he's like a homeboy. Like, he's very direct and to the point about a lot of things. But in some of the passages you read, if you started off with Mark and then you go into the future ones, you can see where they started changing stuff. Where in the original one, it said that, someone was talking, and they asked, they were surprised that they were talking about Jesus. And they're like, are you talking about Jesus, the same Jesus we know, the Jesus of Mary? Immediately, the moment that they said that was like that was slander, because that was gossip right there. They were basically saying like Jesus of Mary, meaning like we all know that like she had this like secret thing going on, and that she had him out of wedlock. And so when they refer to him in that way, that's what they meant. That's what that meant at that time. It was meant as a slander. It was meant as a having trouble remembering the damn word that I was going to use, but anyways, it was meant as an insult. It was meant as an insult. But then when you look at the Gospels after that, they changed it and put, Jesus of Joseph. So they changed it. But the original, if you look at the original version of it, it's Jesus of Mary. So they already were all aware of it, and they all gossiped in the village and etc. But anyways, I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, he had brothers. Yeah, brothers and sisters. So after that, either Joseph already had children from a prior marriage, or they had children, Mary and Joseph, after Jesus. Jesus would have been the first one. So then there was James the Just. There was Simon, which I think, there's Simon. And then there was Thomas, the twin. They refer to him as a twin. So I don't know if twin of Jesus being he has a second brother, or if he's one of the twins of the other brothers. And then there was also two sisters that are named in the Gospels. Read the Gospels; it's all in there. Jesus, the sisters, I think one was named Mary as well, and the other one I forgot what the other one was. Simone. I think her name was Simone. But anyways, he had brothers and sisters. You can think of it, 247 piece. Would the new coming be the same as the new world? You can consider it that. We go through cycles. Our world, our civilizations, we all go through cycles. We go through cyclical cycles on this planet, and then we also go through consciousness cycles as well. We're in the process of having a 2-part cycle peak, which means we're cycling into a world, a pattern where we're going to have a lot of world events peaking, stuff going on the planet as the Mother Nature, and then there's a consciousness peaking that's happening as well simultaneously. So that's a 2-part peaking. So it's kind of going to be, it's an intense experience. We already saw the good taste of that in 2020. It was a very huge year for transformation and change, and it forced a lot of change. So that's just like one representative of this like shift. There's no end. It's just a cyclical ending of one sort and then a beginning of a new cycle. Viva. I have read so many books. Some of the material, here's a few of the people that I would recommend. First of all, do your homework when it comes to the different versions of the Bible, because people are like, I read the Bible. I'm like, which version? There's like 40 or 50 plus versions of it. And most people, when they talk about reading the Bible, they're referring to the newer versions of it, which were significantly altered and significantly corrupted by the church because they had agendas. So you need to do your homework. The original text, and like I said, it's not like everything was put together. They took a lot of the texts of the Torah or the books of Moses, and they incorporated it and used some of that as part of like the Old Testament. And then they also created the New Testament. I mean, they stitched together the New Testament, and they used the 4 Gospels as like the premise, but then they incorporated some other texts as well. And a lot of the material that was selected for the New Testament was because of a monk. There was a Christian monk in the 4th century who, there was a letter circulating at that time, and he basically made a list of what is authoritative Christian doctrine and texts that are based in Christian doctrine and what isn't. He basically circulated a letter, and he was sending it around to some of the other archbishops and all of the other communities. And so that's where they started to kind of get lined up. And then you have the Council at Nicaea, which began the process of starting to kind of thin out what was going to be used and what wasn't, and they had to kind of work around that. They were meeting back and forth because they were trying to come up with a single source, and then Emperor Constantine is the one who kind of helped to facilitate that. He was using the Christians to kind of leverage his own power. He knew he wasn't going to be able to fight it, so he thought he might as well just embrace it and work with it. It's almost similar, and for those of you, I'm about to get a little political because I know y'all are going to be like, so if you want to get off now, you get off now. But the way that Trump used and is using the QAnoners is the way that Emperor Constantine used the Christians. Because at that time, all of the Roman citizens, all of the other civilizations, when they thought of Christians, they actually thought of Christians as a cult. and they would talk about them as a cult, because there were different forms of Christianity. There were earlier Christians who were more in line with the teachings, and then there were a large group of Christians who were more focused on Jesus as God. So there was some Christians who were more focused on that, and that was what they were obsessed with. Then you've got the other earlier groups of Christians, the Gnostics, who were more focused on the teachings. So a lot of their material, which was also supported by James, the brother of Jesus, and the Jerusalem church, because he became a very big power in the Jerusalem church in the earlier Christian period. And then later on, the Pauline Christianity stepped in and took over. So Paul, the guy who never met Jesus, who just had a vision and said he knew Jesus and he knew his message, even though he didn't have anything to do with him, never met him in life. And he actually went against the apostles and Peter. He went against a lot of the apostles, and he went against the brother. I think there was actually a story where he and James, Jesus' brother, at the Jerusalem church, because James had heard all about the drama and all about the misinformation that he was producing in Jesus' name, in Yeshua's name. And so he recalled Paul and he said, you need to come and see me because we need to discuss what you're doing. And at that time, Paul was in Rome, and he was teaching in his own way, propping himself up and disputing the family of Jesus and the teachings from the other Christians in the areas who were teaching very different forms of Christianity. So he was trying to teach his version of it, and James was like, "What the hell are you doing? You're going out." It's almost like if someone went and started to basically speak on behalf of Selena's life, but weren't the family. But they never met her, never had anything to do with her, and they went out and started to talk about Selena and speak on her behalf. Like, that would be so, like, what? That Selena, true, authentic Selena, like, devotees are going to have a problem with that. So anyways, the Paulines, there was a story where James and Paul had a huge confrontation at the steps of the Jerusalem church, which is the where the Temple Mount was at. And Paul lost his temper, and he threw Jesus' brother down the steps and beat the hell out of him. And so after that, they just kind of like, James was not having it and told everybody to not have anything to do with Paul, that he was not to be trusted, and that he was spreading lies about Jesus, etc. And so at that time, a lot of Paul's ministry left him because they were not going to go against James or the family of Jesus and what they had been putting out for so long. And so then a few years later, James was killed. He was stoned to death. And then Paul was also killed, I think around that same time as well, because the Romans were coming back in and they were trying to take over everything again. And that was around the time that they destroyed Jerusalem and got rid of it. So that was the end of it. So then then Christianity continued to grow, but Paul's version of Christianity, Paul's teachings and Paul's ideas about Jesus won out because of the lack of being able to be supported properly by the family of Jesus. And after all this happened with the Romans, the disciples spread out and they went into different directions. Most of them supposedly went into Syria, and Mary Magdalene also ended up in Syria as well, with a lot of the family of Jesus as well. There's also an area right outside of Spain, in an island, where Jesus is a lot of his earliest followers that he actually interacted with, and some of the people that are connected to his family actually ended up on this island right off of Spain. So when you hear the story about Jesus, walking on water, or helping with the fishermen, it didn't happen at the sea that they the story's based in. It actually happened right outside of the gates of Gibraltar, near closer to Spain, because he had been doing a lot of traveling. He was being sponsored by a lot of people. There were a lot of wealthy people who were buying into his message, and there were a lot of people who not only were just Jewish, but also he had a very wealthy uncle, Joseph of Arimathea. He was a very wealthy uncle. He owned a tin business, and so he had a lot of travel and trade between the different areas there. And so he had the means and the resources to be able to spread his message. So there was a lot of Christianity that was spread out besides just ancient Judea. And so when this other version of Christianity spread and Paul's line took over, then some of these other earlier forms of Christianity, they were basically deemed heretics, and they had to go underground. So either they hid a lot of their texts, that's what you have, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, and then you also have the the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of that stuff was hidden by these earlier Christians who were trying to like preserve what they had been supporting for some time. And so now, you know, the earliest actual Bible that we know of, that it's a complete version of the Bible, is from the 4th century, and it's around the time of when, and it's at the Vatican too. But there are earlier texts older than that Bible that were piecemealed, and they existed in different areas, and some of it being the Nag Hammadi Library, some of it being in the Dead Sea Scrolls. A lot of Syrian works were preserved, and they're now all starting to come to light. So it's an interesting like story. But there's a lot of different sources, and what I would say to you is, when it comes to the Bible, think of the Bible as a reboot. It's a reboot of another story. It's a reboot of other texts. And so if you think of it that way, then do your homework and look at the different versions and where they're based out of. I have like 7 or 8 different Bibles. So I wanted to focus on more of the earlier versions, which have a very different type of understanding about Jesus and his interactions with his disciples. And whenever he was very open and direct with the ones closest to him, his disciples, Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was like his like go-to. She was like it for him, because she got what he would talk about. But whenever they would have company, or whenever there would be outsiders who were not the disciples, he would always speak in code, because he knew they would not fully understand some of the teachings that he had. And he was a rabbi, by the way. People would think that he was just this random person who walked around. No, he was a rabbi. Like, you read the stories of him teaching in temples. You were not allowed to teach in a temple unless you actually had a relationship with the priestly sects and you have permission to teach in a temple. No one just could go up to a temple and teach inside of it. Think about it, guys. Like, if I wanted to teach, is it going to be okay for me to walk into a temple or into a mosque or into a Catholic church and just start giving lectures? No, hell no, they're going to run me out of there. I would have to have a reputation, or I would have to be associated with that sect or with those groups of people, or with priests, or to be able to do that. So for him to go into a temple and to teach his congregation, which he was doing, he wasn't just doing it out in the middle of nowhere. That means that he had relationships. That means that he was connected. A lot of his story has been misunderstood and lost over the years, but I got plenty of different versions of it. But it just depends. You have to do your homework, because there's so much there, and you can't always take everything for word of mouth. Just because it's a version of a story that is older than the standard text in the Bibles that most people have, doesn't mean that it's correct. It just means that that's an earlier version. You have to really look at the consistencies and what's lining up and what's separated. But the older texts, the oldest versions of the Bible, most of the Bibles that people have been significantly altered, because they were trying to shift the perspective away from some of these earlier stories and some of the earliest ideas that either were about Jesus or about his following or his teachings that went against things. And also, when Paul came along, he was trying Christianity that would be accepted by the Romans, because there were a lot of Roman citizens who became intrigued and interested in the teachings and some of those earlier ideas and concepts. And so he was trying to kind of shift it so that they would accept it, because back then the Romans thought of the Jewish people the way that you have a lot of these conservative or more extreme views in the US of Mexicans. The way that the Americans think of like Mexicans or like day laborers or all that other stuff, all of that is the way that the Romans thought of the Jewish people at that time. They were out in the backwoods, they were uncivilized, there's a lot of these ideas that it carried on. And so when Paul was trying to build his ministry around the teachings of Jesus, he was trying to make it palatable for the Roman citizens, for these other non-Jewish citizens. And a lot of it had to do with like the simple idea of being circumcised. It's just the stupidest thing. But in the Jewish tradition, everything has to be a certain way. With the Greeks and the Romans and all, there was a lot more leeway, and there was a lot less of that. So, and also if you pay attention to the Gospels and you look at the last 2 or 3 Gospels, notice the wording, notice the language used. All of these types of descriptions and words, and it's less of a conversation and less of a teaching, and it's more of a story with a narrative. And so this is very similar to the way they used to write about things in Rome as well. This is how they would express themselves. So a lot of these stories, a lot of these gospels were designed for the Roman citizens because they were trying to convert and get people on board. But that was Paul's version of Christianity, not the mainstream Christianity of the time, which is not what's now we have. Now we have Paul's version, which took over, and Paul was turned into, I think he was turned into the first pope. So, or no, I'm sorry, Peter was turned into the first pope, but Paul was the instrumental part of getting it going in that direction. So, and it's like a random thing there, but yeah, exactly. They don't want to acknowledge that he had brothers and sisters, but it's in the Gospels. Like, read it. It's not like you can't ignore the fact that it's there. So they say, oh, those are his cousins, or those are, they like go in circles, but it's clearly stated there. And if you read earlier versions and interpretations, definitely it's very clear. Michelle's like, is there a hell? There is if you believe in one. This is hell. This physical world, this reality, all that you can experience in a hell state is here. But the idea of like a physical place where people go to suffer for all eternity is horseshit. It's something that was used to manipulate and to force people into submission. It's always been the tactic. It's always been the way to get people to line up, is you scare the hell out of them, or you scare the hell into them, which is what they did. So it's just a construct, and it's based on some of the older religious beliefs and older ideas. Actually, the idea of hell comes from, what does it come from? It comes from religion that during the time of the first century was a much more prominent or established religion. I forgot the type of, I forgot what religion it was. I forgot. There's so many like things you have to remember. The thing about it is I'm not always the best with like remembering the specific detail, but I can remember the general idea because I'm used to just like breaking it down in a different way. If I remember, I'll let you know. Actually, let me see. I'll tell you. No, I'll remember. It'll come up through. Which versions of the Bible would you say are more accurate? The one that I like right now and the one that I'm reading, and this is just one, right? This is just one, and it's not the full Bible. It's just a version. It's a new take on the Gospels, but it's based on a lot of historians and a lot of translators were involved in this to try to get it back and strip it back to the original forms of these texts. But one of the ones that I really like is this one. It's called The Five Gospels, right there. The Five Gospels. So that's one that I've been reading there. So I love it. It's really, really good. But that's one of the ones that I'm reading. There's different versions, and you can't assume that everything goes together, because remember, they took Jewish texts and they basically incorporated it and used it to prop up Christianity, because Christianity was a new movement. It was a new cult at that time. And back then, if you didn't have a historical heritage, you weren't taken seriously. So the idea of a new belief system or a new thing is almost like what people consider to be like, oh, when you think of like some of these newer diets, and people say, oh, that's just like one of those newer diets, it's just the fad. People thought of Christianity as a fad because they thought it was very much of a cult. So what they did was, in order to help prop it up and build up its heritage, to give it some sort of historical relevance, they used the Torah, or they used the old Jewish text to kind of add it on to create that kind of historical feeling of like, this is worth something. This has been prophesized for, even though those are two separate different things going on. And at the same time, also, a lot of Jewish people did not believe that Christ was the Messiah, because the Messiah was supposed to do, and there was two Messiahs, by the way. There wasn't just one, there was two. There was the warrior that was going to be the Messiah, and then there was the one who was the part of the priestly caste. Jesus was the priestly caste one. There were also the warriors. So there were supposed to be two Messiahs. And if you look at some of the texts or some of the beliefs of the Muslim people, they still believe this. They still hold on to this, and they believe in these two messiahs who are going to come and who are going to start the second coming, or start the change, or start, apocalypse or whatever. So they still believe that. But the Jewish people also had that in their text as well. The Christianity just like got rid of the warrior one, and they just stuck with the priestly one, which became the version of Jesus, which is what we use today. It's definitely, I appreciate some of the older faiths and religions. I still appreciate my Catholic faith and what I was brought up in. I still appreciate that and have a reverence for it, just because regardless of how I feel about the church and its leaders and how many was it? It was 7 million people who were killed in the Inquisition, or 7 million people killed in the name of Christianity in the last 2,000 years. Like, that's a lot of people. But I think it's 700. It's 7 million. Yeah, it could be wrong. It could be 700, but I don't think it's 700. I think it's 7 million, if I remember the number correctly. But I appreciate it. I have reverence for it. I have respect for the faith itself, because I know it serves people in some ways. I don't think that it serves everybody, and I think that now we're getting to a point in our self-realization as human that religion can be something that causes more harm than good, because now our civilization has gotten to a point where it is outgrown religion. Religion is too boxy. It forces everything into this small space, or into this small thing. And so when you squeeze everyone into a box, you force them into submission of an established belief, or and mostly out of fear. But God doesn't go in a box. God never was in a box. Our ideas are boxed in, because that's all we're able to understand and comprehend. I actually, the book that I just showed you, I was wanting to use that because I've been reading it and deciphering and decoding it. And there's a lot there that I just, wow, like, holy shit, that people completely misunderstand or confuse what they were reading, and how they misinterpreted everything, and how the continual misinterpretation of text perpetuated and continued that cycle of misunderstanding. So there's like a whole lot more you understand when you read it, but you have to have a spiritual slant. You have to understand energy. You have to understand law of attraction. You have to understand manifestational principles. You have to understand compassion and the duality of love and fear. You have to understand all of these very complex spiritual ideas and concepts to fully understand and grasp what has been written in obvious ways, but is actually coded in a way where it's like, unless you get it, you ain't gonna get it. So it's so interesting reading things. It's almost like I'm reading everything for the very first time and seeing it in a completely different way. Michelle, they tell me because I'm not baptized I'm going to hell. Michelle, I was baptized, and apparently I'm still going to hell just because I'm gay. I am born out of wedlock. So I was born out of wedlock. My father was married, and my mother was his mistress. So I was born out of wedlock. I am the bastard child of someone, and I'm gay, which is another, supposed sin. And then on top of that, I'm Mexican, which apparently now is a sin as well. So, I mean, I have all kinds of, and I speak to the dead and I do prophecy, which there's not supposed to be any more prophets or any more psychics in the world, even though the majority of the texts in some of the earliest biblical texts are based on what prophets have shared. So it's like, okay, what the hell? Like, really, people? Like, okay, you literally got all your information from people just like me, and then you want to crucify me because I'm one of them? Like, are you crazy? So yeah, I don't take people's like perspectives, because they just don't understand. Yeah, Cassidy's like, what is the best way to connect to Christ consciousness? I have been trying my whole life, but I still struggle. I think this comes from being Jewish in my last life. Connecting to the Christ consciousness is not hard at all. You just have to do three things to connect to the Christ consciousness. Know your divinity, meaning accept yourself as God. Know that all others are divinity as well, meaning accept God in all others. And then allow yourself to be led by faith. And when I mean by faith, it doesn't mean have a belief in something without validation. Have a faith in something that is obviously pulling at you. In other words, when I make a decision or I make a choice in my life, and I don't always know if I've made the right decision or the right choice, but I feel good about it or I feel like it's the right decision, if it is something that I was meant to do, or if it's what I'm supposed to be doing, I will immediately have all of these synchronicities, mini miracles, affirmations come up that remind me that I made the right decision. If I made the wrong decision, I will be course corrected fairly quickly if I just pay attention and allow myself to be led. So like earlier with the live with the lady, and I told her about the center and having a place, and she said she saw a place today, and I said, I told her, she said she just feels like something's blocking her. I was like, it's not blocking you. The answer is no. The answer is no. This is not the place. This is not the time. And so the universe is giving her clear guidance, but she is so in love with what she's trying to produce that she's trying to force it into being, when the universe is saying it's coming, but not now and not here. And so at that moment, you have to trust in faith that even if this is not the right time or the right moment, allow yourself to be led. The synchronicities will start to show up that validate the decision you made of just allowing you to be led and allowing for the next way to be made. And then they will show up. The way will be made. The way will show up. And so when you operate that way, you become, you go into autopilot with the creation, with the creator. You go into autopilot, which means a lot of what you're doing is going to be automatically happening, even if you're not even thinking about it. And it becomes autopilot for you. Okay? Yeah, exactly. Correct. Yeah, this is Courtney, Kathy, Courtney. Yeah, Kathy, it is Courtney, Kathy, Courtney. Yes, I feel the same way. I love this. Like, I can talk about this all day. I know some people think, because people assume that I'm talking about religion. I'm not really talking about religion. I'm not promoting religion. I'm teaching about the historical context of religion, and I'm teaching about the stuff that I was never taught at church. Like, it pisses me off that I was never taught this. Why was I never taught this? Why was I never taught about, some of the details in the biblical stories? Like, one of my favorite stories growing up when I was in the church is the Noah's Ark story. And even in school, I used to ask, like, how did he get all those animals in the boat? That's like a logical question. How did he get all those animals? And I was just told to not ask questions and not to question God. And so, they didn't tell us about the part in the story where Noah was running around naked, drunk, and he was basically flashing his children. And they were trying to help him and cover him up and get him back into the house because he was a drunken fool. And he felt angry and ashamed that instead of being accountable to himself for basically like going and exposing himself to everybody, instead he ended up punishing his children, or ended up making them accountable. Like, that's really shitty. You're the drunken fool out there naked running around, and exposing yourself to everyone and to your boys, and then you want to punish them and make them guilty for your behavior. Like, you got some problems, man. So yeah, there's like things you should read and know about. Awesome. All right, guys, I think I am done. Let me check over here just to make sure. Yes, Lily's like, can you link the names of where I can find verbal texts of the earlier versions? I'm legally blind. Yes, I will. What I'll do is I'm going to share a lot of what I am talking about. I'm going to share it, and I'm going to share where I get the material from and where I've read all this from. So there's a lot of different sources, and you kind of have to read a lot of different pieces and then see the patterns and the synchronicities between all of them, because you start to realize there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that supports a lot of these things, but it's not like it's all made easy for us to find. And if anything, in the past, it's actually been made difficult for us to get a hold of. So yeah, I am going to post some of these and make them available. Thank you, Maria Paula. Tam, I do not believe she was a virgin. She was a human person. She was a human being. Jesus was a human being. I don't believe Jesus was only God. God can't exist in one form because God is everywhere, all wheres. So God is in all of us and in all beings. Jesus may have been much more aware and much more connected, which I wholeheartedly believe, because some of what I've been able to experience in my life has definitely helped me to understand what the hell happened with Jesus, or what the heaven was happening with Jesus. So I definitely understand him much better now as a person than I did being conditioned into believing these ideas that were pushed by the church. They were never pushed by the people in Jesus's life at the time. People were not going around in that time telling everyone that he was God. In fact, to say that would have been blasphemy. They were just acknowledging that he was they were referring to him as a Messiah, but it just depends on what you refer to as a Messiah at that time, because they were expected to do two. There were expected to be two of them, and there had already been, like, at that time there was a crap load of people who showed up who were claiming to be the Messiah. Jesus never actually claimed it, and in fact, he never said, "I am the Messiah." He just went along with it when people would claim that about him. He just said, okay, that's what you want to believe, then so be it. If that's what it takes to get you to listen to me, then go for it. Go with that. And so that's where that came from. But that was pushed, that propaganda of him being a Messiah and being God was pushed years, like a couple hundred years later. Like, it became this like cult idea about him. It's the same thing that you have cult ideas about, Trump from the QAnoners. They believe these things because that is what they bought into, and they continue to feed each other. And so it's this idea, but that was something that he didn't promote himself. Anyway, all right, I think I'm done. All right, guys, I love you all. I will be back next week. We're starting 2 new books next week, so I'm going to promote those books in the next few days, so keep an eye out for them, okay?